Unidentified. My Top UFO Cases by Hector V. Bello, March 2018. The 1967 Shag Harbour UFO incident in Nova Scotia, Canada. Pre-incident aerial phenomenon. Air Canada Flight 305. En route to Toronto while flying over Sherbrooke and Saint Jean, Quebec at 3658 meters or 3,658 meters from the Halifax International Airport. Canada Captain Pierre Charbonneau of Flight 305 pointed out to co-pilot Bob Ralph that there was something strange on the left side of the aircraft at 7:15 p.m. In his report, the captain reports an object tracking along on a parallel course a few miles away. He describes it as a brilliantly lit rectangular object with a string of smaller lights trailing the object. At 7:19, the pilots the pilots noticed a sizable silent explosion near the large object. 2 minutes later, a second explosion occurred, which faded into a blue cloud around the object. The yellow object. Darrell Dory. Darrell Dory, his sister Annette, and his mother were sitting on the front porch in Mahoney Bay when they noticed a large object maneuvering above the southwestern horizon. The next day, Darrell wrote a letter to RCAF Greenwood Base commander asking what was flying over the water that evening, as he had never seen anything like it. M.V. Nickerson of Sambro, Nova Scotia. While standing at the wheelhouse of his vessel, Captain Leo Howard Mercy was looking at four blips on his Decca radar that were stationary. When he looked up, about 28 kilometers from the vessel's windows, he could see the four bright objects situated in a roughly rectangular formation. The entire crew of nearly 20 fishermen stood on deck and watched the object in the northeastern sky. Mercy radioed the Rescue Coordination Center and the harbor master in Halifax asking for an explanation, and filed a report with the Lunenburg RCMP, or Royal Canadian Mounted Police, outlining his sighting when he arrived in the port. Halifax Harbor sightings. The Chronicle Herald and local radio stations reported a glowing object that had been seen by many people who had called their newsroom. They reported witnessing strange glowing objects flying around Halifax at around 10 p.m. The initial events on the night of October 4th, 1967 at about 11:20 p.m. Atlantic Daytime, it was reported that something had crashed into the waters of Shag Harbour. At least 11 people saw a low-flying lit object head towards the harbor. Multiple witnesses reported hearing a whistling sound like a bomb, then a whoosh, and finally a loud bang. The object was never officially identified and was therefore referred to as an unidentified flying object, or UFO, by Government of Canada documents. The Canadian military became involved in a subsequent rescue recovery effort. The initial report was made by the local resident Laurie Wickens and four of his friends. Driving through Shag Harbour on Highway 3, they reported a large object descending into the waters off the harbour. Attaining a better vantage point, Wickens and his friends saw an object floating 250 to 300 meters offshore in the waters of Shag Harbour. Wickens contacted the RCMP detached in Barrington Passage and reported he had seen a large airplane or small airliner crash into the waters of Shag Harbour. Search and rescue efforts. Assuming an aircraft had crashed within about 15 minutes, 10 RCMP officers arrived at the scene concerned for survivors. The RCMP Detached contacted the Rescue Coordination Center, or RCC, in Halifax and advised them of the situation and asked if any aircraft were missing. Before any attempt of rescue could be made, the object started to sink and disappeared from view. A rescue mission was quickly assembled. Within a half an hour of the crash, local fishing boats went out to the crash site in the waters of the Gulf of Maine off Shag Harbour to look for survivors. No survivors, bodies, or debris were taken, either by the fishermen or by the Canadian Coast Guard search and rescue cutter, which arrived about 1 hour later at nearby Clark's Harbor. By the next morning, RCC Halifax had determined that no aircraft were missing. While still tasked with the search, the captain of the Canadian Coast Guard cutter received a radio message from RCC Halifax that all commercial, private, and military aircraft were accounted for along the eastern seaboard in both Atlantic and Canada and New England. The same morning, RCC Halifax also sent a priority telex to the air desk at Royal Canadian Air Force headquarters in Ottawa, which handled all civilian and military UFO sightings, informing them of the crash and that all conventional explanations such as aircraft, flares, etc. had been dismissed. Therefore, this was labeled a UFO report. The head of the air desk then sent another priority telex to the Royal Canadian Navy headquarters concerning the UFO report and recommended an underwater search be mounted. The RCN in turn sent another priority telex tasking the Fleet Diving Unit Atlantic with carrying out the search. 2 days after the incident had been observed, a detachment of the RCN divers from Fleet Diving Unit Atlantic was assembled, and for the next 3 days they combed the seafloor of the Gulf of Maine off of Shag Harbour looking for an object. The final report said no trace of an object was found. The Condon Committee. The Shag Harbour reports were investigated by the Condon Committee. Press coverage. The Shag Harbour reports received extensive front page coverage in the Halifax Chronicle Herald. The paper ran a headline story on October 7th titled "Could Be Something Concrete in Shag Harbour UFO, RCAF." The article by Ray McLeod included witnesses' descriptions of an alleged object and crash, Royal Canadian Air Force's RCAF search and rescue effort, and the Royal Canadian Navy's RCN underwater search that was underway, including 3 additional divers from Fleet Diving Unit Atlantic. The head of the RCAF's air desk in Ottawa, Squadron Leader Bain, who recommended the RCN undertake an underwater search, was also quoted saying the RCAF was very interested in the matter. "We get hundreds of reports every week, but the Shag Harbour incident is one of the few where we may get something concrete on it." The article also mentioned UFO reports that immediately preceded the incident, including one from a woman in Halifax around 10 p.m. The Chronicle Herald ran another story on October 9th titled "UFO Search Called Off," stating that the Royal Canadian Navy RCN had ended an intensive undersea search for the mysterious unidentified flying object that disappeared into the ocean here Wednesday night. As to what was found, the RCN stated, "Not a trace, not a clue, not a bit of anything." The story of the search called off for an alleged mysterious dark object was also carried by the Canadian press in some other Canadian newspapers.